meeting. But the postcard that I passed out to everyone is what Bill Rogers, our program director for 2024, has put together for the first two programs. The first one is on January 25th here at the Town Council Chambers, and it's a history of mining in the Shenandoah Valley presented by Dave Crease. And the second one, the March one, is Thursday, March 21st, and this will be Philip Bigler, Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And let me introduce Ramblin' Rusty. I met Ramblin' Rusty when we had our summer picnic at the Seventh-day Adventist Academy. And since then, he's been around and he does a lot of, and so he's videotaping. It will be on YouTube. So without further ado, I think I've got everything covered. I'm going to ask our guest speaker, Dale, to tell a little bit about himself. So he's going to talk a little bit about it himself and then go directly into the program. So thank you, Dale, for being here with us.
Thank you. I have a degree in physics from Ridgewater College and a master's in physics education from JMU. And with that education, I taught 8th grade physical science at Broadway in the middle school for 33 years. And then when I retired, I started doing supervising of student teachers for JMU and spent 13 and a half years doing that in 17 different middle and high schools from Strasburg to Stanton and in between. So with my history background, I joined the Harrisonburg Rockingham Historical Society in 1978. It's been a long time, but not that long. And have served as a board member, recording secretary, vice president, president 4 years, and I'm currently their resident historian. So I get a lot of questions sent my way if they're having problems at the museum coming up with a good answer for someone. So that's it. And when we start the program, you'll kind of see why I was interested in Lucy Sims. So let's get started.
Do we need, can you see this well enough with the lights on, or would you like the lights down? Close enough for government work? Perfect. Okay.
So why Lucy Sims? She's the most famous African-American teacher in Harrisonburg ever. And she was born several years before the Civil War, grew up on the northeast edge of Harrisonburg in a part of town for many years called Newtown. Now they call it Northeast Neighborhood. But she served in a prominent family of lawyers who, despite owning slaves, really cared for their welfare after emancipation and helped them get educations. The story of this remarkable woman needed to be remembered and celebrated. And this evening we'll look at her life and also a little bit about public education for African Americans following emancipation. She was born in 1856, or about that time, to Jane Sims, who was a slave in the Gray family of Harrisonburg. They lived on a farm called Hilltop on the northeast edge. Her father is unknown, but she is mulatto, so apparently there's some white ancestry in there someplace, or perhaps even a member of the Gray family fathered her. Her mother Jane and her grandmother Lucy were all enslaved by the Algernon Gray family there in Harrisonburg. But one of the interesting things about it, Lucy Sims' grandmother and her mother, her grandmother was also named Lucy, and her mother, Jane, were slaves owned by Abraham Lincoln, who lived on Linville Creek in Rockingham County, and that's where the Lincoln Homestead is located, if you've ever seen that house and know about it. So he had slaves and sold some, including Lucy's grandmother and mother to the Algernon Gray family in Harrisonburg. And there are actually some records that were found in the attic of that house that listed some of the family. So Hilltop Farm, this is a map done in 1877 of Harrisonburg, included in Gray's Atlas, and you can see there the Valley Turnpike up at the top, and Washington Street is the street that was on the edge of the Gray Farm. It says Hilltop Farm there, and the Newtown Cemetery is the cemetery in Harrisonburg for African Americans. So that's where the farm was. It's the present site of Harrisonburg's Ralph Sampson Park along East Washington Street. The home had been built for Algernon Gray by his father, and the Sims family were enslaved there. The home burned in 1869, and there are no known photographs of that house, but that indistinct image there on the right is from a painting that was done in 1867, a panoramic painting of Harrisonburg, and that shows the Hilltop Mansion near the crest of the hill up there. The Gray family. The ancestor locally was Irish-born Robert Gray, who came to Virginia in 1785 and to Harrisonburg in 1805. In 1812, he married Isabella Waterman of Harrisonburg, and the Waterman School and the Waterman Drive in Harrisonburg are all named for this family. They were important lawyers in the Gray family, and Robert was an important civic leader in Harrisonburg. So Robert and Isabella had this important house, I call it Collicello. Some people call it Collicello, but if it's Monticello, a CH sound on the C's because of its Italian origin, I think it was probably Collicello. It was built for them on the northern edge of Harrisonburg and was torn down probably in the 1960s. There's a poultry plant on that location in Harrisonburg on the beginning of Crotzer Road. Robert Gray also had houses built for his son. This Englewood here was built north of Harrisonburg and east of Crotzer Road for his son, Charles Douglas Gray. This is sort of across the road from the plant there that does books. I forget what their name is now. Anybody remember? Anyway, they produce a lot of the bestseller books, print them there in Harrisonburg. And this is across Crotzer Road from it. Hilltop Mansion was the home built for Algernon Gray. Like to go on walks, noticed when they were excavating for the foundation for that picnic shelter that there were some artifacts in the ground. And so she was able to get the construction stopped for a little bit, although there was a contract that had a certain date on it. They couldn't look at it too long, but JMU came and did some field study there and found some artifacts, found part of a wall and so forth that were probably either part of the house or part of an outbuilding that was on that farm. And the Ralph Sampson sign is an old one because they completely changed the look of the signs in Harrisonburg, and now it's like a gray and a blue color sign. Lucy Sims would have attended the colored schools in Harrisonburg, and they were called colored schools at that time, from about 1866. And she began attending Hampton Institute in Hampton, Virginia in 1874. We're pretty sure the Gray family helped her gain admission because some members of the Gray family used to write letters to Hampton talking about some of the former slaves. That's Virginia Hall at Hampton Institute, which was a class room that had classes that Lucy would have had teaching in. She completed her courses at Hampton in 1877. Now that's just 3 years, but they weren't able to confer a baccalaureate degree until the 1920s. So what she got was 3 years, earned her a teaching certificate, but it was the highest available in Virginia at the time, so it was the top certificate. And here's an engraving of what it looked like in a Hampton classroom in about that time. It's kind of interesting that Lucy wrote back to Hampton and was telling about one evening at the chapel, she saw several speakers, and she was tired from her day's work and her study, and she didn't like the idea of sitting through a talk by another man who was just called upon. And she looked at him and she said, this man doesn't know anything. I thought, what are they calling on him for? It turned out it was Booker T. Washington. Little known to many at that time, she says. I was soon thoroughly awake with his ability and eloquence began to show itself. I remember he said that in Philadelphia he saw busts of great men and that he had resolved to put his there also. Of course, he eventually did. Hampton's leader was General Samuel C. Armstrong. He had led the U.S. colored troops during the Civil War, all African-American regiments. And after the war, he joined the Freedmen's Bureau and became head of it in Virginia in 1866. I'll talk a little bit more about them in a little bit. With the help of the American Missionary Association, he started Hampton Institute to train African Americans to become teachers and skilled workers. And Lucy Sims really liked him, held him in high regard. Her first year back in the county after her years at Hampton, she began teaching in a one-room school called Athens Colored School by Rockingham County that was held in Long's Chapel. If y'all know about that Long's Chapel, it was a church for African Americans, kind of between, it's east of Lacey Spring and also 10th Legion. It's kind of in that area. Maybe not 10th Legion, that's a little bit too far north. Anyway, this is from Lake's Atlas done in 1885, and it shows the Athens community. There's Long's Chapel, shown by an arrow. The road that's close to it is Indian Trail Road. That's one of the oldest roads in Rockingham County. If you follow that road from near 10th Legion on toward Kieseltown, it just follows the lay of the land because they didn't do any excavation much to make it a better road. And Mount Tabor is the name of a community that was a little bit north of Lacey Spring. And of course there's a United Methodist Church there now called Mount Tabor. This is what Long's Chapel looked like and would have looked like pretty much when she taught there. It got grown up in the early 2000s, so when you went by it, you almost couldn't see it for all the brush and the overgrowth. It was built about 1871 with the help of the United Brethren in Christ Church. Now, they're not Church of the Brethren, there's no connection there. These are United Brethren in Christ. One of their nicknames was German Methodist because they used the German language in their services up into about 1840. Anyway, they were anti-slavery, and they helped newly freed slaves after the Civil War as part of their mission outreach. So they helped come up with the money for some of these churches for African American communities. And here it is after it was restored, and they have a roadside marker there that mentions Lucy Sims. It says where she began her career. This closed in 1925, and a couple years after she left there, she was only there 1 year, Rockingham County built a school for African Americans just up the hill from the church location. It no longer exists. Former enslaved families were sold land here after the Civil War. There was a Rhodes family that had a big farm, and they sold off the land to these families. Most of the families that lived near Long's Chapel in the 1870s were African American. Since Athens was a substantial distance from Sims' Harrisonburg home, she needed to find lodging close to school. And at one point, a video was done and it showed Lucy Sims walking to this school. Well, she couldn't have walked there. It was way too far away. She had to find lodging close to home, and she was able to find room and board in the home of a local African-American blacksmith and his family. he lived in that Athens community. For the next school year, in the fall of 1878, she wanted to go to Maryland because she and her best friend, who was also teaching in an African-American school closer to Newmarket, they heard they paid better in Maryland. And so they were looking for a better life in Maryland. But in that summer, the superintendent of schools in Rockingham County in Harrisonburg offered them jobs in Harrisonburg. And she was teaching African-American girls. They were separated by sex and race at that time in the basement of a church. And I'm not sure which church it was because two churches had their basements used for teaching African-American students. The school that she began teaching in that was built especially for African Americans in Harrisonburg was called the Whipple School, and she was likely a student in this same schoolhouse in earlier years. And if you look at that map, you can see Black's Run, the creek that goes through Harrisonburg, kind of snaking around there, and Rock Street was where the school was located beside that. And then that map calls it the Colored School. This is real close to that steakhouse. What's it called? The Chop House or something? Yeah, it's just right across the road from that. And that school has been torn down for many years. In 1883 then, she began teaching in the new Harrisonburg Colored School that opened on Effinger Street in Northeast Harrisonburg. And she continued teaching in that school for the rest of her life, 51 years, until her death in 1934. And her teaching career spanned an amazing 57 years. You can see the top picture is the original four-room school, 2 up, 2 down, and then after 1910 addition, the thing was basically double the size it was originally. Effinger Street there's still part of it in Harrisonburg, but the part where the school was destroyed for urban renewal in the late 50s or early 1960s. It's about where Rose's department store is located now, about where the school was. Although Miss Sims had experienced some declining health issues in her later years, she died unexpectedly in the summer of 1934. She was planning on going back for another school year, but a neighbor in the morning found her slumped over her front porch, and she had died right there. They always figured she probably had a heart attack and was looking for help when she died. She was buried in Newtown Cemetery beside her beloved mother in July 1934. So Lucy's stone there is kind of hard to read now because the engraving has gotten kind of dim. That's her mother, Jane Wilson. Her mother married Robert Wilson after emancipation because they legally weren't supposed to be married before. Her mother died in 1908. And this is what the gravestone inscription says. It tells when she died and what her age was, and says that she was loved and honored for a life of unselfish service to the community and her race. She taught in the public schools of the city for 58 consecutive years, not losing a day. She rests from her labor. Now, that's really not exactly right. The fact is, the last couple of years, she had some sickness that made her lose some days of teaching. But an article that was done in the earlier 1930s in the newspaper, Harrisonburg Daily News, mentioned that she hadn't missed a day. But that's because that was before her last couple of years. So she had some posthumous honors. The first one was in the same year of her death. Harrisonburg City Council named the playground along East Washington Street the Lucy F. Sims Athletic Field. And then in 1939, the new school on Sims Avenue opened on what had been the athletic field. It was appropriately named in honor of Lucy Frances Sims. So the street that runs in front of the building is also named for her as Sims Avenue. Here's some pictures of her through the years. Almost all of them taken from a class picture, except that one all the way on the left, which is the best photo. One reason this book was done was because a local attorney in Harrisonburg, who was the attorney for Harrisonburg City Schools and Rockingham County Schools, loved the story of Lucy Sims. And he wanted more people to know about it, especially students in the schools. And so he came up with the money to have the book printed and published and so forth, and gave copies of the book to all the social studies and history classes in Harrisonburg high schools, Rockingham County high schools, and perhaps even some in the middle schools. The Sims Wilson family. She had an older brother, John Sims, who spent most of his life in Washington, D.C., had a pretty good job for the federal government. In fact, he was working for the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, or Printing and Engraving. Lucy had an older sister, Ellen Sims, who married a Peter Allen, and they lived in Harrisonburg. And a fact that I thought was really interesting and sort of indicative of some of the time of childbirth. Ellen Sims in the census for 1900 says she had given birth to 10 children, but only 2 were still living. Amazing loss in that family. Their mother, Jane Sims, married a Robert P. Wilson after the Civil War, and Robert and Jane Sims had one son named Ulysses Grant Wilson. UG was his nickname, who would have been a half-brother to the 3 older children of Jane Sims. UG Wilson was also a school teacher, and he spent his first years teaching in Rockingham County colored schools. He was in Mount Crawford Colored School, Pleasant Valley Colored School, and some others. Wilson then taught with his sister Lucy in the Effinger Street School for 24 years, and some of those years they were in rooms beside each other. He was also a writer and a poet. Although he lived into the 1940s, I could not find a photograph of him. Nobody seemed to have a photo. And the Sims biography contains some examples of his poetry. A lot of his poetry is sort of African-American slang, sort of like Uncle Remus stuff that probably isn't too well looked at today, I'm not sure. But he also did some other good poetry. He even wrote a song that was submitted in competition for the state song of Virginia. Okay, the research story. So what got me started on this? Renovations of the Sims school building were to be completed in 2005, and they asked me to give a talk about Miss Sims to the op shop. That's for people that have some disability, that have a little way to make some money. And it was going to move into the Sims basement that spring. So I created that PowerPoint presentation about Lucy Sims for the talk. And I began researching and working on an eventual 20-page paper about Lucy Sims to gather facts about her life. When fellow educator Larry Huffman asked me to help him out in his Foundations of Education classes at JMU when he covered African American education, for many years I showed a modified and expanded PowerPoint about Miss Sims and as a model of an African American teacher who was very successful. So resources that were used: Bill O'Harper, a son of Doris Harper Allen, who died a couple of years ago, was a graduate of Sims School, and he shared correspondence and postcards and letters that had come out of the file for Lucy Sims at Hampton Institute. And those materials had been originally obtained by Mary Alford Fairfax, who herself was a famous teacher who taught at Sims School for many years. But she was too young to have taught with Lucy Sims. Special collections at Carrier Library at JMU have transcriptions of many interviews that were taped with former students of Lucy Sims. And they also had some good photographs of Sims classes that you'll see a little bit later. But those interviewed described what they remembered about Lucy Sims. They really did a nice job, and they all got transcribed and also, I think, were kept as audio recordings. The remembrances helped provide information about Lucy Sims was like as a teacher, a citizen, and a cherished member of her community. There were also Hampton Institute publications because she often contacted Hampton Institute and told about her years there and how she liked the school and so forth. And the Sims biography includes an extensive list of sources used and hundreds of endnotes about some of these sources. Also, members of the Gray family that had enslaved her family wrote about their former slaves. This is a book called Our Mammy and Other Stories, written in 1906 by Nettie Gray Dangerfield, and it even had some photos of some of their former slaves in it, that I was able to get a photo of Lucy's grandmother, Lucy Sims, the first Lucy. Some milestones. There are two milestones in Virginia history that happened during her lifetime that I'd like to highlight. The first involves public education, and the second involves suffrage, which is the right to vote. The 150th anniversary of public education in Virginia happened in 2020, I guess it was, yeah. Because the federal government demanded that Virginia pass a new constitution to get back in the United States, because during the Reconstruction period, Virginia, and you can see on this map, it's in blue, it was military district number 1, and it was ruled by the military, the federal army. Virginia Constitutional Convention called to write a new post-war constitution ended in April of 1868. So provision of that new constitution called for a state system of pre-public education for white and black children. Although they did have to be separated, and the first couple of years they had the girls and the boys separate too. Another provision of that constitution gave African American men the right to vote, starting in 1870. A statewide referendum to vote on the new constitution was held in July of 1869, and that's when it was officially adopted, but it did not start the state public education until the next year, 1870. So the year the Sims biography was published, 2020, was the sesquicentennial since free public education for all children had begun. Lucy would have been about 14 years old at that time, 1870, when Harrisonburg established their public schools for all students. And she certainly would have attended public schools in Harrisonburg, likely in that Whipple building that we looked at earlier. Unlike many fellow students at Hampton Institute, she didn't need any remedial classes. There are a lot of students there, black students, that needed help before they were ready for the advanced work, but not Lucy. The year her biography was published also marked a century for another milestone in Virginia, the right for women to vote. The 19th Amendment made it illegal to deny this right in federal elections. The amendment was passed by Congress in 1919, and the required number of states didn't complete it until 1920. So the ever civic-minded Lucy Sims wasted little time. She went to the courthouse and registered to vote, and you can look in a voter registration book and see her signature there for that year. So that year, she was able to vote in the 1920 presidential election. I think she was very patriotic, a good citizen. In that election, the Ohio Senator Warren G. Harding ran against Ohio Governor James M. Cox. All women, including Lucy, could do the following if they were 21 years old at least, were a current resident, and they registered to vote and pay 1 year's poll tax, which was $1.50. at least 30 days before the election. Well, the $1.50 wasn't easy to come by in those days for a lot of people. So there were some people in Harrisonburg, some African-American leaders that were coming up with some money to help those people register to vote. It's noteworthy that Virginia didn't ratify that amendment until 30 years later, 1952. Okay, what was it like for early African-American education in Harrisonburg? They began in 1866, that's a year after the war, and 4 years before public education. Lucy would have been about 10 years old at that time. And those first schools were organized by Northern religious societies and taught by teachers sent here from New England by missionary societies of various northern churches. The first ones in Harrisonburg, the first teachers, came from the Free Will Baptist Church in New England. And so the importance of these early teachers was mentioned in Booker T. Washington's book, Up from Slavery. He said whenever it's written, the part that the Yankee teachers played in the education of the Negroes immediately after the war will make one of the most thrilling parts in the history of this country. The first schools in Harrisonburg used rented quarters, and as I have already said, the boys and girls were taught in separate buildings. The Freedmen's Bureau and the U.S. Christian Commission both helped those former slaves by helping construct the schools. And there's an engraving of what it looked like in the Freedmen's Bureau school. The Freedmen's Bureau was formerly known as the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Land, and was called simply the Freedmen's Bureau. It was created in Congress in 1865 to provide education and medical care to former slaves and poor whites, and to protect their post-war rights. The Bureau became a major educational force for African American education in Harrisonburg and all over the South, really. The two-room Whipple Schoolhouse that we talked about earlier was built in 1868, so this is a couple years before public education, and the Freedmen's Bureau provided funds for this building. Not only was it used as a little schoolhouse by the creek, as they called it, it also was a location for African Americans to hold meetings in Harrisonburg. By 1882, it was too small, and Harrisonburg began building the four-room school on Effinger Street that we saw pictures of earlier. And the street itself gave the school its unofficial name. It was not just called the Whipple School. Well, who was Whipple? His name was George Whipple. He was the founder of the American Missionary Association, and he was a major promoter of black education in the South. And that association helped build many schools and churches in the post-war South, including Hampton Institute. Here's some photos. 57 students. I wouldn't want a class that size, but I guess she was successful. A much more reasonable school class. If you notice some whitish faces in the front, those are sons of the only Confederate general in Harrisonburg, J.R. Jones. He had children by a black servant in his house, twice, by two different servants. He like so many people, he didn't try to hide the fact, and he would walk the boys down the street and get ice cream and let people know they were his children. Here she is with 31 students out on the porch.
Ready to go to bed?
The tall girl in the back, I thought that was an X marks the person on the thing, but it's actually her hair. It's a ribbon in her hair.
Nope. I'll answer for you. Thank you for answering.
Here were 33 first and second graders around 1928. And this famous photo has been in the newspaper different times. left to right is Roberta Wells Weaver Greenlaw, her mother, Helen Irvin Wells, her grandmother, Roberta Irvin, and then Miss Sims. And the one extreme left was the granddaughter of this Confederate general, and she died in 2010. I think she was living in the Chicago area. And here's a famous picture too that's been highly used, and it shows that picture that's on the beginning of the PowerPoint. This was taken in 1980. It shows Amanda McCall, Mary Alcott Fairfax, that had the Lucy Sims materials from Hampton, and Lester McCall, Amanda's husband. They were custodians, I think, and cafeteria workers in the school. And they found this special photo of Lucy Sims someplace and managed to preserve it. When the book was pretty much finished, Harrisonburg City Schools found a copy of a letter that William Keister, the superintendent of schools in Harrisonburg for many years, had sent to Lucy Sims. And I was able to get it in the back of the book. And what the letter had to do with was, we knew that she was once engaged, and the story was she moved in to help her mother when her mother became ill, and her fiance got tired of waiting and broke off the engagement. Well, at the time her mother was ill, she did do that. No other details of the engagement were known until this letter showed up, because in the letter she says she's been teaching for 25 years and she thought that was enough. It was time to get married, and she would have been about 46 years old at the time. She didn't give his first name, but she said she planned to marry a Mr. Braswell, and he must have lived in Florida because that's where she thought she was going to be moving to. She still planned to be in Harrisonburg for the start of the school year that fall. And Keister wrote back to her saying, "You've been a source of inspiration to me many times. I had never heard a word of complaint as to your teaching from any parent." And Keister's closer in the letter said, "I'm very sincerely, with a heart full of gratitude for all you've done for me and taught me in looking on the good side of things." Now, the Harrisonburg Rockingham Historical Society was tasked with handling the sales of this. I got absolutely nothing from this book. So they got all the profit, and they also are where the sales are taken care of. But I'll show you another place they can be bought too. And we talked about copies being given to the schools. So that's Rocktown History, the old Historical Society in Dayton. They're the ones that have the boxes of books. But O'Haze's Fine Arts and Crafts on South Main in Harrisonburg also has the books in stock. So that's an easy place to get them and not have to go to Dayton. Do you have questions? Yes, ma'am.
I ended the Lucy Sims School first year with Bill into the 7th grade at the Lucy Sims. Who's that for?
I want to hear what you're saying.
You were in 7th grade that year?
I went into
Or you
the,
went,
into the 7th grade,
Uh-huh.
the first year of Sims.
right.
Before that, I had gone to Effinger Street School.
Oh, so you actually went to Effinger.
Mhm.
Nice.
I went to Effinger Street School. I went to sixth grade, and you went from the 6th grade. You went into the 7th grade, Lucy Sims, and it only went to grade 11.
Uh-huh.
You graduated in grade 11. You didn't go 12 grades.
Yeah.
So
That didn't come till the 1950s in the
it
Valley.
was 12.
Juanita, did you take the bus to Harrisonburg, or how did you get there?
I lived in Harrisonburg.
Oh, you lived in
At that
Harrisonburg
time,
then. Okay. I guess I've always just known you in Newmarket.
I didn't always live in Newmarket.
So was there just one
I
teacher
really-
at the original school? Was she the only teacher, or did she have other teachers with her? Repeat the question.
You're talking about Lucy Sims?
Yes.
In
She-
which school?
The original.
Oh, the original one,
Original one,
the church building.
yes.
Yeah, she was a single teacher in that building. And when she got to the Whipple building, there might have been a second teacher. When she got to Effinger Street, I think there would have been 4 rooms in it originally. You were in it when it
was, upstairs when
Yeah.
I was there.
had an auditorium up there.
Uh-huh. It went to, I went into the 3rd grade into Effinger School. And I went 3, 4, 5, 6.
Six,
And then you went into the 7th grade when the Sims was built. But Sims only went to grade 11.
Right.
They didn't go 12 grades.
Right. Any other questions?
And
Yeah.
I remember you showed W.H. Keister.
Uh-huh.
I remember him being principal, superintendent of the schools.
And of course, he was a very long time. Harrisonburg and Rockingham were connected until 1916. Harrisonburg became a city, an official city, and at that point they split. And of course, they have a Keister Elementary School in Harrisonburg named for him.
W.H. Keister.
Uh-huh. Yes.
I've seen a historical marker on Sims Street at the Newtown Cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember what it says, but can you remind us, there was something about Newtown burning to the ground?
No, I don't think so.
Or there was something about the blacks being evicted from the neighborhood or something?
Oh, yeah. That's the urban renewal project that was done in the late 50s, early 60s, that supposedly got rid of substandard houses. And a lot of people's houses were burned to get rid of them, to get them off that property. And then, of course, what they did was they came in and built sort of cracker box type houses for a lot of the people that,
The city did that?
yeah. There was kind of a nationwide movement to do that kind of work.
And where did most of those people go when their houses were burned?
They were, do you know
What?
where the people went who lost their houses to urban renewal? Well, in other words, if you go in Harrisonburg now, like if you're on Reservoir Street and you see these houses that look alike, maybe in a white color, those are houses where, that's the kind of house that they moved a lot of the black families into in the part of Harrisonburg that was close to Sims School, just to have a place for them. But a lot of people's houses were fine, and the strange thing is only one business, pretty much only one business, survived being torn down to keep going, and it was Klein's Ice Cream.
I remember when Klein's opened.
And it was a house right along the walk on
They
Main
had a
Street.
Big celebration, and all the kids from school went down and got these great big cones of ice cream. And they had, I think, like one flavor that I'll never forget, it was raspberry. And got these great big cones of raspberry. But now the black lived in a section called Newtown.
Yes. Uh-huh. Or now they call it Northeast Neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Well, an interesting thing about Klein's, they used to call it Klein's Frozen Custard. And the government said, you can't call it frozen custard unless it has eggs in it. So you have to call it ice cream.
Yeah, I remember when they opened.
I was gonna say, sorry, at the beginning of the talk, you mentioned Abraham Lincoln.
Uh-huh.
That was his uncle's house there, where, what they just have redone, right?
This Abraham Lincoln was a cousin of the president.
Oh, a cousin, okay,
Uh-huh.
I see. Same name.
Same
But
name.
a cousin, okay, I got it.
And there was also an Abraham Lincoln that lived in Lacey Spring.
Oh, okay,
So there were a couple Abrahams
Okay,
around.
yeah.
But it was the one on Linville Creek
yeah, uh-huh,
that owned the slaves.
okay, I got it.
Thank you, Dale. I appreciate you sharing about Lucy Francis Sims and all of your research that you've done. Some of my friends in this room know that I grew up in the equality state. A lot of states have nicknames, and I happen to have been born in the equality state. So, history lesson, those that don't know me that well, what state is that?
Wyoming?
Wyoming, yes, the first state to grant voting rights to women. My father immigrated from Denmark and settled there, so.
Well, they also had the first woman governor.
Yes, they did. Her name was Nellie Taylor Ross. So thank you so much, Dale.
Rusty, do you want to play Psalm 91?
Are you ready to go to bed?
No, Gerald's coming tonight.
Who's coming?
Gerald and
Oh,
Carolyn
no.
and whoever, and I said, he said, do you think Rusty will help us? And I said,
Nope.
hmm?
I'll answer for you. Thank you for answering.
Okay.